The night shift always carried a kind of stillness that made Mark's thoughts louder than they should have been. The hospital hallways were quiet, dimly lit, and stretched endlessly like silent rivers of tile. His mop slid rhythmically across the floor, squeaking faintly as it pushed away the faint stains of the day. Mark had worked these shifts for years, not because he loved them, but because life had left him little choice. Being a single dad meant there were bills to pay, lunch boxes to pack, shoes that needed replacing, and bedtime stories that had to be told no matter how tired his body felt. His daughter, Lily, was his reason, his anchor, and the only light that made the long nights bearable. On this particular evening, Mark was working the private wing of the hospital, a place he rarely entered. The rooms here belonged to people with last names that carried weight, families with fortunes and reputations polished like glass. It was a world far removed from his own, but tonight it was his mop and bucket that glided through its pristine corridors. He worked quietly, his mind drifting to whether he'd saved enough for Lily's school trip, when he caught something unusual. A faint sound carried through the heavy wooden door of one of the rooms. It wasn't the beeping of machines or the chatter of nurses. It was a sound of raw, unfiltered pain. Soft sobs, muffled as though the person crying was trying not to be heard. Mark paused, his mop hovering midair. He wasn't supposed to intrude. Janitors kept their heads down, blended into the walls, invisible until something needed fixing. But the sound tugged at him. He glanced up at the plaque by the door. Emily Carter. The name sparked recognition. She was the young billionaire who had made headlines not long ago. Tech prodigy, philanthropist, a woman who seemed untouchable, unstoppable. But life, Mark knew too well, had a cruel way of leveling people. Rumor had it she had been in a car accident, one that left her paralyzed from the waist down. He didn't know if the stories were true, but the sobs from inside answered that question better than any newspaper. Without really thinking, Mark leaned his mop against the wall and approached the door. He hesitated, debating whether to knock or simply walk away. What business did a janitor have stepping into a billionaire's room, offering comfort? Still, something in his chest told him it mattered. He raised his hand and tapped gently. There was silence, followed by a sharp voice, strained and fragile. "Who is it?" Mark cleared his throat. "Just the night janitor." "I didn't mean to interrupt. I heard, well, I thought you might need." His words trailed off, awkward, unsure. The door creaked open a fraction, revealing Emily sitting in her wheelchair by the window. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but even in her brokenness, there was a kind of elegance about her. She looked at him, almost annoyed, but too exhausted to mask her pain. "You thought I might need what?" she asked bitterly. Mark stepped inside slowly, careful not to overstep. "Maybe just someone to remind you that whatever you're feeling, it doesn't mean you've lost everything." She let out a hollow laugh, the kind that carried no joy. "Lost everything? Look at me. I built an empire. I was unstoppable. Now I can't even stand up on my own. Tell me, janitor, what do you know about losing?" Her words were sharp, but Mark didn't flinch. He had faced worse, not from strangers, but from life itself. He looked at her with a quiet steadiness. "I know what it's like to watch your little girl fight to walk after a car crash. She was 7 when it happened. Doctors told me she might never run again, maybe not even walk. But I wouldn't let her believe that. I taught her once, when she was a baby. And I taught her again, step by shaky step. She walks now. Sometimes she limps, sometimes she stumbles. But she walks." Emily stared at him, her mouth parting slightly as if to argue, but no words came. She tried to laugh it off, though it cracked into something softer. "And you think you can teach me too? That's absurd." Mark gave a small smile, his voice gentle. "Absurd, maybe, but I've learned that strength isn't about what the doctors predict, or what the world expects. It's about believing you still have fight left inside you. You don't need to be unstoppable, Emily. You just need to take the first step, literally. If you'll let me, I'll help you." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms and headlines looked at the janitor whose hands were rough from years of labor. She almost laughed again, a laugh that carried disbelief. A janitor helping a billionaire walk. "Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" Mark shrugged, his smile tinged with warmth. "Ridiculous things happen every day. A man like me raising a daughter on his own. A little girl beating odds stacked against her. A billionaire crying alone in the dark. Life is full of ridiculous stories. Maybe this can be one of them. Emily turned away, blinking back new tears she hadn't expected to shed. His words weren't polished, but they pierced through the noise in her mind. She had been surrounded by specialists, therapists, experts with degrees hanging on their walls. Yet none of them spoke with the quiet conviction this janitor had. She whispered almost to herself, "You really believe I can do it?" Mark's voice was steady, unwavering. "I don't just believe it. I've seen it, and I'll stand here every night if I have to, reminding you until you believe it too." Emily let out a shaky laugh that melted into tears. For the first time in months, the sobs weren't just of despair. They carried something different, something fragile but real. Hope, quietly pushing through the cracks of her brokenness. At first, Emily thought she had entertained a fool's dream. The idea of a janitor, someone with no medical degree, no professional title, being the one to guide her back to walking was almost insulting to her pride. After all, she had hired the best doctors, the finest therapists, people with entire teams dedicated to her recovery. And yet, here she was, sitting in her wheelchair, staring at the floor and wondering why none of their words had touched her the way Mark's did. Something about the quiet certainty in his eyes lingered in her mind. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nonsense. But when the next night came, and she saw him mopping outside her room, she found herself asking softly, "Do you still think you can help me?" Mark looked up, surprised but calm. "Only if you're ready to let me try." From then on, their unusual partnership began. During his short breaks, Mark would slip into her room, gently encouraging her to attempt movements she had long given up on. It wasn't physical therapy in the formal sense. He didn't have the credentials, but it was something deeper, something more human. He didn't treat her like a patient. He treated her like a person who had stumbled and needed someone to remind her she could rise again. At first, the progress was laughable. Emily would grip the bars in her room, trying to push herself upward, only for her legs to tremble and collapse back into the chair. Each time, frustration boiled inside her. "See," she would mutter, "pointless." But Mark wouldn't let her quit. He would crouch in front of her, his calloused hands steady on her arms, his voice low and encouraging. "Don't measure the distance you fall. Measure the courage it takes to try." Again, days turned into weeks. Slowly, Emily began to tolerate the routine. What she once mocked, she now looked forward to, though she never admitted it out loud. Her body resisted her, but her spirit, slowly rekindled by Mark's faith, began to shift. And then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Mark's daughter, Lily, came to visit. A bright-eyed girl with a limp in her walk, she bounced into the room carrying her backpack, her smile lighting up the sterile hospital walls. "Hi," she said cheerfully to Emily, as though addressing an old friend. Emily couldn't help but stare at her. The girl's gait was uneven, her movements imperfect, but she radiated a confidence that was almost contagious. "Dad told me you're practicing walking," Lily said, matter-of-factly. "That's cool. You'll get it." "I did." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "You had trouble walking too?" Lily grinned and lifted her pant leg, revealing faint scars running along her skin. "Car accident. Doctors told me I wouldn't walk again. But Dad never gave up. And neither did I. It was hard, and I cried a lot. But now look." She took a few steps around the room, her limp noticeable, but her pride unshaken. "Not perfect, but better than a wheelchair, right?" Something broke inside Emily then, not out of pity, but out of realization. Here was a child who had faced the same darkness and walked through it, literally. And she had done it not because of elite resources, but because of love and relentless encouragement from the very man now standing beside her. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her future wasn't sealed. From that day forward, her determination deepened. She practiced harder, sometimes gritting her teeth against the pain, sometimes cursing under her breath, but always moving forward. Mark celebrated every small victory. The day she managed to stand for 10 full seconds, he clapped as though she had won a marathon. When she took her first step holding onto the bars, Lily cheered so loudly a nurse poked her head in, smiling at the sight. The breakthroughs came slowly, almost invisibly, until one morning it happened. Emily gripped the bars, her knuckles white, her breath shaky. Mark stood beside her, his hands hovering close, ready to catch her if she fell. Lily watched from the corner, eyes wide with anticipation. With a trembling exhale, Emily shifted her weight forward. One foot moved, then another. Her legs wobbled, threatening to betray her, but they didn't. Step by fragile step, she crossed the short distance between the bars. By the time she reached the end, tears blurred her vision. She had done it. She was standing. She was walking. The room erupted with joy. Lily clapped, bouncing up and down. Mark's eyes glistened, though he quickly wiped them on his sleeve, pretending it was nothing. Emily's body shook, but her heart soared. She had laughed at him once, doubted him, dismissed him as just a janitor. And now, here she was, crying, not out of despair, but out of the purest relief she had ever felt. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mark shook his head slowly, his hand steady on her arm. "No, Emily, you kept yours. You believed when it mattered." Those words stayed with her long after her discharge. She left the hospital not only with the ability to walk again but with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent her life building wealth, empires, and legacies on paper. But now she understood that the truest legacy was built in the lives you touched, the hope you restored, the kindness you chose. Within months, Emily launched a foundation dedicated to helping accident survivors regain mobility, not just through therapy, but through mentorship and encouragement. She often told her story, and though people marveled at the science of her recovery, she always pointed to something else. "It wasn't the machines or the experts alone," she would say. "It was the janitor who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." And somewhere in the crowd, when she gave those speeches, Mark would sometimes be there, quietly watching, never seeking recognition. Lily, standing beside him, would smile proudly, knowing the truth. Her father wasn't just a janitor. He was the man who helped a billionaire remember how to stand, and more importantly, how to live again.